The Watts family lived in a quiet neighborhood, where their lives seemed to embody the essence of a perfect family. Chris, the dedicated husband and father, worked tirelessly to provide for his wife, Shannon, and their two young daughters, Bella and Celeste. Shannon, full of energy and charm, often shared snapshots of their happy family life on social media, painting a picture of joy and togetherness for all to see. However, behind closed doors, a different story was developing. On August 13, 2018, the Watts family vanished without a trace. The police were baffled by the sudden disappearance. They questioned neighbors, searched the family's home, and interviewed Chris Watts extensively. The quiet street was shattered by the sudden disappearance of the Watts family. Chris, the grieving husband, pleaded publicly for their return, his voice heavy with sorrow. Yet, as events uncovered, a shocking undercurrent began to ripple beneath the surface of his grief. Detectives, intrigued by the inconsistencies in his story, decided to go deeper into the case. His forced emotions and vague answers raised more questions than they answered. The public's gaze turned from sympathy to suspicion. Then, on August 15, 2018, a shocking revelation emerged, plunging the community into a state of disbelief and horror. The once peaceful neighborhood was now the epicenter of a dark mystery. The case of the Watts family remains one of the most disturbing and perplexing true crime stories of our time. It serves as a stark reminder of the darkness that can hide behind a veil of normalcy. Frederick, Colorado, a quiet town nestled in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, was a place where neighbors knew each other by name and children played freely in the streets. It was a town where life seemed simple and predictable, where the sun always seemed to shine. The Watts family, with their seemingly perfect life, were a part of this idyllic community. Shannon Watts, a vibrant and outgoing woman, was a devoted mother to her two young daughters, Bella and Celeste. She was passionate about her career as a health coach and often shared updates about her family's life on social media. Her posts depicted a happy and loving family, full of laughter and joy. She was a woman who lived life to the fullest, always smiling and always positive. Chris Watts, Shannon's husband, was a quiet and reserved man. He worked long hours as a technician for Anadarko Petroleum, and he seemed to be a dedicated and loving father. The couple's social media posts painted a picture of a strong and stable family unit. They appeared to have it all: a beautiful home, successful careers, and two adorable children. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, tensions were beginning to emerge. The Watts family was facing financial difficulties, and Shannon's health had been deteriorating. Additionally, Chris had been having an affair with a coworker, Nicole Kessinger. As Shannon's suspicions about Chris's behavior grew, she began to notice subtle changes in his demeanor. He was often distant and withdrawn, and he seemed to be avoiding spending time with his family. Shannon couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. She started to pay closer attention to Chris's behavior, and she began to document his actions. Shannon's growing suspicions were fueled by Chris's increasingly erratic behavior. He was often distant and withdrawn, and he seemed to be avoiding spending time with his family. Shannon noticed that Chris was frequently texting and emailing someone, and she became convinced that he was having an affair. Despite her growing suspicions, Shannon remained hopeful that she could salvage her marriage. She believed that if she could confront Chris and get him to admit to his infidelity, they could work through their problems and rebuild their relationship. However, Shannon's hopes were dashed when she discovered that Chris had been lying to her about his whereabouts and his activities. She realized that he had been spending time with Nicole Kessinger behind her back, and that he was no longer interested in their marriage. Shannon was devastated by Chris's betrayal. She felt betrayed, humiliated, and heartbroken. She was also worried about the impact that Chris's infidelity would have on her children. She knew that they would be hurt by their father's betrayal, and she was determined to protect them from the pain. In the days and weeks that followed, Shannon struggled to cope with the emotional turmoil she was experiencing. She was constantly worried about her children's well-being, and she was also concerned about her own safety. She knew that Chris was capable of hurting her, and she was afraid that he might try to silence her. As Shannon's fears grew, she began to take steps to protect herself and her children. She started documenting Chris's behavior, and she also reached out to her friends and family for support. She was determined to expose Chris's true nature and to ensure that he would be held accountable for his actions. The morning of August 13, 2018, dawned as any other in the quiet town of Frederick, Colorado. The sun peeked over the horizon, casting its warm glow on the sleepy streets. Little did anyone know, this day would forever change the lives of the Watts family and the entire community. Shannon Watts, a vibrant and energetic woman, returned home from a business trip, eager to reunite with her family. As she pulled into her driveway, she had no idea that a dark cloud was looming over her household. Inside the house, a horrific scene was emerging. Chris Watts, the man who was supposed to love and protect his family, was consumed by a rage that would lead him to commit unspeakable acts of violence. With a cold, calculated demeanor, he strangled Shannon in their bed, silencing her forever. The horror didn't end there. Chris turned his attention to his two innocent daughters, Bella and Celeste. With a heart that seemed devoid of compassion, he suffocated the young girls, extinguishing their bright futures. Once the abominable acts were committed, Chris embarked on a terrifying mission to dispose of the bodies. He drove to a remote oil field, a place where few people ventured. There, he callously dumped the lifeless bodies of his wife and children, leaving them to be discovered by others. As the day wore on, Shannon's friend, Nicole Atkinson, grew increasingly concerned when she couldn't reach her. Shannon was known for her reliable nature, and it was unusual for her to miss a doctor's appointment or ignore messages. Nicole's intuition told her that something was terribly wrong. Driven by her concern, Nicole reached out to the police to request a welfare check on Shannon's home. The police officers arrived at the Watts residence, and as they approached the house, a sense of unease settled over them. The normally pristine home seemed eerily quiet, and there were no signs of life. As the officers entered the house, they were met with a haunting stillness. The home, once filled with laughter and love, now felt cold and empty. They searched room by room, but there was no sign of Shannon, Bella, or Celeste. The only clue to their disappearance was Chris Watts himself, who appeared calm and collected, despite the missing family members. The police investigation quickly intensified, and as they probed deeper into the case, they began to uncover disturbing details about Chris's behavior. His inconsistent statements and his evasive answers raised suspicions among the investigators. As the police investigation into the disappearance of the Watts family deepened, officers began to scrutinize every detail of Chris Watts' behavior. Body camera footage released by the police department showed Chris Watts' demeanor during the initial welfare check. His nervous behavior and inconsistent statements raised eyebrows among investigators. His initial claim that Shannon had left with the children after a heated argument seemed implausible, especially considering her loving nature and strong bond with her family. As the investigation progressed, detectives delved deeper into Chris's life and discovered a web of deceit and lies. They uncovered his secret affair with Nicole Kessinger, a co-worker, which had been going on for months. This revelation provided a potential motive for the murders. The police also collected forensic evidence from the Watts home, which pointed to a gruesome crime scene. Cadaver dogs were deployed to search the property, and their findings further solidified the suspicion of foul play. The evidence suggested that the murders had occurred within the confines of their own home. One of the most crucial moments in the investigation came when Chris failed a polygraph test. The results of the test cast serious doubt on his claims of innocence. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Chris was subjected to intense interrogation. Under relentless questioning, he eventually confessed to the horrific crimes he had committed. Initially, Chris attempted to shift the blame onto Shannon, claiming that she had killed their daughters in a fit of rage before he strangled her. However, as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Chris was the sole perpetrator of these heinous crimes. His confession painted a chilling picture of a man consumed by rage and a desire for a new life, free from the constraints of his family. The revelation of Chris's double life and his growing resentment towards Shannon provided a plausible motive for the murders. Investigators believed that he was driven by a desire to start a new life with Nicole Kessinger, free from the financial burden and emotional ties of his family. His growing resentment towards Shannon, fueled by his infidelity and financial struggles, may have ultimately led him to commit the unthinkable. Following his confession, Chris Watts was formally arrested and charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and tampering with bodies. The charges reflected the gravity of his crimes and the immense pain he had inflicted on his family and the community. The trial that followed was a harrowing ordeal for the victims' families. They had to relive the horrific details of the murders in court, facing the man who had taken their loved ones from them. Shannon's family, in particular, endured immense emotional pain as they listened to the gruesome details of her murder and the suffocation of her innocent children. During the sentencing phase, they delivered emotional victim impact statements, expressing their grief, anger, and disbelief at Chris Watts' actions. Shannon's mother, Sandra Urtsusek, delivered a powerful statement, describing the devastating impact of the loss of her daughter and granddaughters. She spoke of the emptiness that had consumed her life and the pain that would never truly heal. She expressed her anger at Chris Watts for his callous disregard for human life and his betrayal of the family's trust. Shannon's father, Frank Ritsusek, also addressed the court, sharing his own grief and sorrow. He spoke of the joy that Shannon had brought into his life and the love he had for his granddaughters. He expressed his anger at Chris Watts for the pain he had inflicted on the entire family. In a bid to avoid the death penalty, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all charges. His plea spared the victims' families the trauma of a lengthy trial, but it did little to alleviate their suffering. The plea deal, however, did not lessen the public's outrage over the atrocious crimes. Ultimately, Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. The sentence reflected the severity of his crimes and the immense pain he had caused. The public and media were outraged by the sheer brutality of the murders and the cold-blooded nature of the killer. The case of the Watts family murders remains a terrifying reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human heart. The case of the Watts family murders has left an indelible mark on the town of Frederick, Colorado, and the broader public. The once peaceful community was forever changed by the horrific crimes committed by Chris Watts. The case serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of hidden lives and the dark side of appearances. Shannon Watts, a vibrant and loving mother, was tragically taken from her family. Her untimely death sent shockwaves through the community, and her memory continues to inspire others. Her family has honored her legacy by establishing the Shannon Watts Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting victims of domestic violence and raising awareness about the importance of healthy relationships. The case of the Watts family murders has sparked important conversations about domestic violence, mental health, and the warning signs that can precede such tragedies. It is a sobering reminder that even the most seemingly perfect families can be hiding dark secrets. As we reflect on this tragic case, we are left with many unanswered questions. What drove Chris Watts to commit such a heinous crime? Was it pure selfishness, or something deeper? Only he knows the true answer. The story of the Watts family serves as a cautionary tale, urging us to be mindful of the signs of abuse and to reach out to those who may be struggling. By raising awareness and breaking the silence, we can work together to prevent future tragedies. Join us next time as we dig into another shocking case, one that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew.